Good morning, all. Hope you are enjoying your stay in Singapore and enjoying the conference. We have NRO number council elections in this conference here. So I'll quickly run through the procedures and invite the election chair to go through some procedures as well. And then we'll hand over the floor to the moderators of the IPv6 panel. So let me run through this quickly. So we have one chair position vacant for NRO-NC elections this year, and the term is for 2 years from the 1st of January 2023 to 31st of December 2024. We have opened the call for nominations on 8th of June and closed on 8th of August. The nominees must meet the criteria, register for this conference before the start of this conference, and also registered or attended one of the past 8 conferences. The elections will be online, and members and APNIC conference attendees are eligible to vote in these elections via online system. The member voting is entitled to 1 vote as an organization, and corporate contacts or voting contacts have the rights to vote online using the Big Pulse voting system. The voting period, it's already started on 1st of September, and the results will be announced today, this afternoon. Now, eligible meeting attendees, you all, if you're not representing your member organization, you're all eligible to take part in these elections via online voting system. You can log in on the conference website and you can cast your vote. Elections will be closed at 1:30 p.m. today, and thereafter the results will be announced. The declaration of results will be done by the election chair. Will be announced around 3 p.m. In the member meeting this afternoon. If you have any disputes or resolutions, please discuss with the election chair. This is a sample of the results that the election chair will be presenting that will be generated from the Big Pulse online voting system, and election chair will discuss further about it. Now, the election chair, as appointed by the APNIC Executive Council, is Anju Mangal. She's also the chair of the APR-IGF. You probably have seen her, heard her in the last 3 days. Her responsibilities are to oversee the election process, appoint the election scrutineers, which I'll go through in a minute, and declare the election results this afternoon and resolve any disputes from the members. Election officers, my colleagues from the APNIC Secretariat, Andre and Connie, their responsibilities are to administer the call for nominations, manage the voting process, retrieve the online voting results from the Big Pulse system, report the results to the election chair, and answer any queries from the members or the attendees of the conference, if you have any. Election scrutineers appointed by the election chair from the RARs, Chris Buckridge and Leslie Noble. Thank you, Chris and Leslie. And their responsibilities are to observe the downloading of these election results from the Big Pulse voting system and notify the election chair if they find any anomalies in downloading those results. Notice of dispute, as I said, any complaints, please report to the election chair, and this has to be lodged 1 hour before the declaration of the results. And there is an email ID there for you to report. The election chair is in the room as well, if you want to talk to the election chair. Now, I'd like to introduce the election chair. Please come up on the stage, Anju Mangal. I'll do the clip.
Again. Okay, I hope there won't be any complaints or any disputes. My name is Anju Mangal. I am honored to serve as the election chair of the NRO and NC election today. I would like to express my gratitude towards APNIC AC for giving me this opportunity to serve you. First of all, I'm going to introduce the nominees running for the NRO NC election. As this is a hybrid conference, we will not be having any live speeches today. but you can find all the nominee profiles and statements on the election webpage. Some nominees have also pre-recorded their short speeches. I encourage you to watch the videos before voting. In the order of the 2 nominations received, I would like to introduce the nominees to you. The first nominee is Gaurav Kansal. The second nominee is Shubham Saran. I wish all the nominees the best of luck in today's election. We will move on to the next stage. Online voting is now open to both AP-NIC members and AP-NIC 54 conference attendees who meet the voting criteria that was explained earlier by Sunny G. If anyone is having any voting or login issues, please contact AP-NIC help desk. You can use the phone, Skype, or live chat. I would like to declare that voting is now open and will end at 1:30, which is UTC +8 today. I will come back to announce the election results during AMM. Okay, member meeting at 3 p.m., which is UTC +8 today. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Saniji now.
Thank you, Anju. So now let's get into the IPv6, the World IPv6. So we have 3 moderators. 2 are in person here, Jan and Stefan, and John JJB, as you all know, is moderating online. So I hand over the floor to John and Stefan and JJB, the trio. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does this work? Yes. Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Jan George, and I will be together with Sander Stefan moderating this panel. I believe John Jason Berzozowski, who should be the original moderator, is now online, and he will. Hey, John. He will take his part more as a panelist, because he was really involved at the beginnings and the organization of the World IPv6 Day and Launch, and should tell his experience. Here we have.
Can we get
Dr. Shin Miyakawa, Anurag Bhatia, and Matsuzaki Yoshinobu, known as Maz. And also online we should have Jeff Houston. Hope he is connected. But because the time of the panel is very limited, we will do it in 2 parts. The first part, we will remember what happened 10 years ago, what happened between now and 10 years ago, how we started with IPv6 World Day, IPv6 Launch, how these moved the IPv6 deployment needle further. And the second part will be more like, we will ask ourselves, what do we need to do now to move the IPv6 deployment even further and make it work? So without further ado, please, can we play the video recording of Leslie Daigle? She was very involved in the whole process from the Internet Society part at that time. So please. Can you open it up? Okay. Maybe before we fix the problem, yeah. Yeah. So, dear audience, who in this room knows about what happened 10 years ago? World IPv6 Day, World IPv6 Launch. Show of hands. Okay. The usual suspects, more or less. Yeah. So Leslie will explain in her video pretty clearly what happened back then and give the overview. And
Jan, yeah, can you hear me, Jan? This is John. Can you hear me?
Hey, John, yes, we can hear you.
Would you like me to help you stall?
Say again?
Would you like me to help you stall while the video is being fixed?
Yes.
I can jump in while I can jump in while the video is being remedied, if you don't mind.
Go, John.
Now that you've promoted me to a panelist from a mere moderator.
Good morning.
Okay, video is
My
on.
name is Leslie Daigle. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at the Global Cyber Alliance. But this morning, I want to talk about some events that were organized just over a decade ago when I was Chief Internet Technology Officer at the Internet Society, namely the World IPv6 Day in 2011 and the World IPv6 Launch in 2012. These were events that were organized because in discussions between multiple network operators, it became clear that many of them faced challenges with the increasing scarcity of IPv4 addresses, and they knew that they had to do something about moving to IPv6. At the same time, they didn't have all the answers necessary in order to make the business case to their management and ensure that the project could be given the green light and made a top priority. Content providers had similar challenges. Talking through the challenges between multiple engineers from multiple organizations, it was a great opportunity to share ideas about what to do and how to overcome individual challenges in deployment. But it also identified some key sticking points that had to be addressed in order to move forward globally. And these were sticking points that no single operator or content provider could address on their own. So in the end, the World IPv6 Day and the World IPv6 Launch were actually engineering tests at scale. The World IPv6 Day in 2011 was not a flag day. It was an actual test to see what would happen if major content providers turned on IPv6 on their front door, so to speak. At that time, or prior to that time, it wasn't actually clear whether in doing so they would lose significant portions of their audiences who would no longer be able to connect because of inadvertently being connected through now defunct IPv6 tunnels, for instance. And this was a significant concern to content provider marketing departments. So the purpose of the World IPv6 Day was for 24 hours, turn on IPv6 on the front door of major content providers and see what happened. Of course, it wasn't just a day. There was a lot of work that was done leading up to that day. There were many trouble tickets at various software development houses that got ramped up in priority as software companies realized that the little bugs with IPv6 that they had been ignoring for so long were going to get stress tested on that day. And in the end, it was a very significant and successful day because it was demonstrated that, in fact, you could turn on IPv6 and it wouldn't cause the world to end. Importantly, no single content provider could have done that on their own. It took all the major content providers joining together and doing it at the same time, jumping off the bridge together, so to speak, to make that happen. And once the major content providers signed up for the day, of course, many other content providers said, put my name on the same list as major content providers, I'm in. So there was a lot of groundswell, but again, it really was about the testing of the system, so to speak. With the World IPv6 launch a year later, it was an opportunity for ISPs to put their stake in the ground to demonstrate that they could, in fact, send enough traffic over IPv6 to the content providers to justify the content providers keeping IPv6 on. And clearly it worked. We still have IPv6 access to major content, and we have an increasing number of ISPs that are enabling IPv6. So why is this still relevant? I will point out that the World IPv6 events happened at a point that was long after the understanding that IPv4 scarcity was going to be a real thing. I mean, initially we had CIDR-based address allocation and moved to classless addressing and the RAR system. And then also there were network address translators installed at individual end networks. All of these things as coping mechanisms to try to address the fact that there were not enough IPv4 addresses for every device on the internet. At the time we ran the World IPv6 events, carrier grade NATs were just becoming a thing. And to this day, there are more and more CGNs and other coping mechanisms being put in place to try to stall the inevitable. And the inevitable is there are not enough IPv4 addresses for a global internet. So what I would like you to take away from the stories around the World IPv6 events is that collaboration across industry competitors is key, and it's possible, and it makes big things happen. So this is our internet. We as internet engineers have to come together and identify where are there sticking points now and what can we do to address those issues. Because even if you think it's too large a problem to solve in your own engineering department, you can work with others and understand how collectively we can come together in meetings such as this one and identify what's the next thing to do. So I hope you'll have a great session and dig in and help solve the problem of deploying IPv6 everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. So now you know. Okay. Maz. Leslie mentioned cooperation between the competitors, between stakeholders. Would you like to chime in on that?
Okay, this is Maz. Thank you, Yan. I'm working for Japanese ISP, and that time I was involved to this event. And coordination and cooperation is pretty important, and we needed that to make the effort useful. If we just do it quietly, it will not have an impact to change the world. So I had heard about the event in advance from Lawrence and Eric, who were involved in this event at that time. So the situation in Japan at that time was not great, to be honest. So NTT, the big telco in Japan, built a large closed IPv6 network that was not connected to the internet. And many users, actually about 30% of the internet user in Japan were connected to it. So there was concern that the users would be affected in maybe various way if large scale IPv6 content was appeared on the internet side. So it was necessary to coordinate the effort to get as many people as possible to think about the issues that led to the adoption of IPv6 and the future. With the help of various groups and the people and the associations, there were opportunity for discussion and sharing such knowledge among the engineers and among competitors. In fact, many people thought seriously about IPv6 adoption, sharing problems and improvement measures, both short-term and also long-term. So from my point of view, it was a wonderful opportunity for us and for many people in Japan to think about IPv6 adoption. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Maz. wise words. John, would you like to chime in?
Yes, please, Jan. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
So first and foremost, I'll be brief with my thanks. Thanks to Sunny, Dan, the rest of the APNEC team. It's a pleasure to be a part of this. Sorry, I could not be there in person. COVID struck me here in the US and prevented me from getting on my airplane. So I do apologize for that. Jan, Leslie, as usual, very much, understated her contribution to the effort. She was as much of an organizer as she was a referee. And I can assure you, refereeing was required in the early days of our planning. If everyone here recalls back to NANOG this summer in Montreal, we had Vint, kick us off on the actual anniversary of World IPv6 Day. But Naz just mentioned two other players from Google, and World IPv6 would have never happened without those two gentlemen, Eric Klein and Lorenzo Calitti from Google. And I'll never forget the conversations that we had. I'll say arguments, in fact. Lorenzo, and as many of you may know him in the APNIC region, very strong personality, was certainly pushing for some pretty aggressive objectives. But as Leslie mentioned in her introduction, there were bugs. There were things that just didn't work. And I think if I could bring this back to some of the key points that Leslie said, she was a facilitator, an organizer, an ombudswoman, but most of all, really a referee. Everybody had a common goal of making V6 happen. But for those of us who were dealing with, cable system equipment that was forwarding IPv6 packets at 19,000 packets per second, we knew what the challenge in front of us looked like. And so did folks like Lorenzo and Leslie. But lo and behold, for the 3 years leading up to World IPv6 Day, and then the year that followed for World IPv6 Launch, it was a long haul with that paid enormous dividends. So I'll pause there, Jan and Stefan, and Sander, sorry, and basically, that would, I like to use that as my intro. I mean, I think truly Leslie deserves a lot more credit than people understand for her involvement in organizing it. So thank you for the opportunity to comment, and thank you again for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, John. Very, very, very insightful and very, very thoughtful. Anurag, Hurricane Electric, how do you remember those days?
Well, first of all, thanks for this opportunity to share the experiences here. It's kind of fascinating to see whatever I'm speaking is typing out in the front screen. It's a really fascinating technology. But is it working over V6? If you go on the URL, if you try to look for quad A records of the URL of otter.ai, it's not. That's essentially the purpose of this panel discussion, that we as the operational community should be able to convey this idea that V6 is important, that even an application which is converting voice into text should be running over IPv6. And this should give us a purpose here. We're talking about it. So going to the question with the history, as Hurricane Electric, we were one of the large backbones fully heartedly supporting IPv6. We tried this through various mechanisms. So early phase, there were broadly two challenges. One was the technical challenge, making sure that it is supported, making sure that various applications supported, various router vendors and everyone else involved in the ecosystem supports it. The other challenge was to promote it, because you'd still find people saying, "Why do I need it? IPv4 just works," and I still find those people. And so a large part of the effort went in the second part, which is to promote IPv6. So we tried a bunch of things. We tried running a popular service called Tunnel Broker to run tunnels, where we would offer IPv6 for free over IPv4, essentially as a mechanism for various app developers, enthusiasts, and everyone else to test out how it feels to have IPv6, to test out their application, to see whether it works or not. We tried things like free IPv6 certifications, where people would come and go through a checklist of tests. They would say, go and dual stack your server, dual stack your server's interface, dual stack your web server, publish the quad A records in the DNS, and for each checklist we would test it whether it's done or not. And once the checklist is complete, we would certify that the person now understands V6, and then we would send them a T-shirt, a rather geeky T-shirt. Anyone here went through our certification? Can you raise hand? Oh, okay, great. If not many, go to he.net. The certification still runs. We still actively support it, so it should be fun. Besides that, we also tried things like running IPv6 webcast around that time. Again, with the same logic that through this word of mouth, it should spread out that V6 is important. It's important to have V6. It's important to go through this transition, and you cannot really run things without doing something about this problem. That's the part on the Hurricane Electric. The other side I see, which is also equally fascinating, is my home country, India. There wasn't much IPv6 pickup until 2016, and by 2016. A newer entrant in the market was working on launching a pretty large network, Reliance Jio, and as they went with this rollout, they realized that they don't have enough addresses. Addressing is the problem, and they started supporting V6 from day one. And thanks to them, as well as their competitors, Bharti Airtel, Vodafone Idea, and everyone else, they followed. And at this point of time, there was a major jump. And at this point of time, we have over 70% deployment of V6. One cannot imagine things working out for 700 million plus internet users without V6. Imagine how much stress CGNet would had at this point of time if there was no V6. So it's really, really important that way. I think I answered that question.
Thank you. Jeff, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to actually go back a little bit further and talk about something that I think most folk have forgotten. I think only a few folk in the room there and a few folk actually remember the interop meetings, conferences that occurred in the late 80s, early 90s. Part of the issue was that what worked was actually an interesting question. The RFCs were great, but actually not very good at defining precisely what worked and what didn't. And the real test was, did your equipment interoperate with all the others? And Dan Lynch, I think he was the computer networking manager at Stanford at the time, came up with a trade show idea that invited vendors to bring equipment and wire them up to a single network and test them publicly in the open. To actually prove to each other and to the folk who came to the trade show that they were able to write V4 code that not just worked, but worked with other vendor code. Now, from then we moved on and interops have disappeared into history, and that's just fine. But when V6 came along, there was a similar kind of problem. And if anyone remembers Teredo, if anyone remembers 6-4, this problem was bad. Stuff didn't really work very well. And trying to convince all of us together that this technology was actually usable and fit for purpose was indeed a major challenge. And each of us individually found that it's easier to sit on our hands and just wait for the problems to resolve themselves because no one really felt any great urgency. And it was really that stressing of the system from Leslie, from Lorenzo and Eric and John as instigators of going, well, let's do this out live, and let's actually take some of the earlier ideas from interop and do what was in effect a live interop on V6 on the internet itself. That was the big change in terms of convincing the industry at large that V6 wasn't just a laboratory experiment, that, you know, the stuff actually worked, even if for a day, but it did work and the internet did not go into meltdown. And so in some ways, that's always going to be helpful. You know, specs are great, but actually seeing the stuff interoperate is actually what matters, I think, to all of us. And that was the major achievement of that particular exercise. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So very true. So there are, every coin has two parts, right? Please, Miyakawa-san.
Yep.
Your
So
thoughts.
my turn. So this is Shin Miyakawa from NTT Communications in Tokyo, Japan. Then after I remember that IPv6 launch 2012, then that was the very nice event to know what exactly happened when the IPv6 turned on. Then we NTT Communications runs the AS2914, very first global tier 1 backbone, which makes dual stack operation, you know, since early 2000. And also as Mazu said that we have a slightly strange access network called threads in the Japanese domestic network. But after the IPv6 launch events, we fixed everything. Now if you're coming to Japan, if you subscribe fiber to the home, now the usual speed is 1 Gbps and $50 per month or something like that is needed to get that. Is completely dual stack, you know, naturally. And all the major cellular phone providers, SoftBank, KDDI, NTT Docomo provides V6 by default to the cell phone. So people does not know what they get. Naturally, we let them use. So all the YouTube go to the high speed over the IP version 6 without PPP transportation. Just IPOE is used to hook up their network to the high speed YouTube and Facebook, whatever content CDNs. So now the Japanese internet traffic, more than 50%, more than maybe higher volume is IP version 6 already. So that's what we can do now. But then at the same time, we are now facing another problem we have to going to fix from now on. So I'd like to talk about after this later section about that session. But again, I really, you know, appreciate that we have done now. IP version 6 is quite realistic, you know, things, and everyone should do that. That's what I'd like to talk this section. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. So we are way behind the schedule, but your thoughts matter. So I would like to open the floor for one quick note. If anyone has a question, note, comments. I don't see queuing. I don't see people queuing. So, okay, thank you very much. And with that, we are celebrating 10 years of this events, and we have come a long way. For some people, it's a success. For some people, it's a bit less of a success. But now our question is, what to do now? Do we need another event like this? Do we need to promote a different idea to move the IPv6 deployment further? There are places where IPv6 is not deployed enough, like enterprises, banks, many other places around the world. Should we enable IPv6 on by default? Should we say whatever you build new must have IPv6 enabled, or so on? So let's have this part of discussion about the future. What to do to make things better. And I will hand this over to Sander to moderate, and let's see what kind of ideas comes up. Thank you.
So like Jan said, this is a celebration of a very successful event 10 years ago. And I think it went so well that a lot of people didn't even realize it was going on. But what's really important about the time then was we had competitors who were taking a risk, but they were taking it all at the same time. So if one of them failed, all of them would fail. So they would not lose their customers to the competitor. So this is one thing to keep in mind. Like we can actually, as a community, do things like this to push things forward. We can work together. Now, this panel is one in a series. There's already been one in the Erin region. There's going to be one in the Ripe region. And so far, what we have heard from people is IPv6 must be on by default. That should be our major focus point in the future. That should be what we all focus on. So to make that possible, there are of course a lot of different things that need to happen. It's not just technology; it's everything. So I would like Maz as our first panelist. Do you think this is indeed the right next step? And what do you think is necessary to make sure IPv6 is on by default?
Okay, so unlike 20 years ago, so internet is everywhere. People are using the internet without deep knowledge about the technology behind. But if younger generation are interested in the engineering side of the internet, we need education, we need information, and we need an environment so that they can learn about the internet, actually IPv6. So for that, we need an easy and self-directed learning environment so that they can touch and feel by themselves. And it's also need to have some good and virtual environment nowadays so that they can actually try by their own. So, and it's also needed to promote such an environment to the younger generation or next generation. They are actually interested in such an technology. That's all.
Thank you. John, what are your thoughts on this?
I wanna agree with Jeff. I think Mr. Houston is I think he hit the nail on the head, right? Interop. Where did interop go, right? And why? Slightly rhetorical question, Sander, but if I look back to NANOG 46, where I was part of the hosting team in Philadelphia, the community basically called me out. Hey, John, a lot of blah 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 about IPv6. Why don't you show us? I think that was fair, right? And we showed them. We commandeered the top floor of the Lowe's Hotel and built a cable network. And I think it's fair to say that the response was extremely positive. So we kept that train going, and I'm sad to say, not in kind of the form of interop that everybody knows and loves, but it was in the form of something we called NOG Lab, which you could argue today is the hackathon at NANOG, bits and bytes at IETF, and all sorts of different interoperability events. I think Jeff is onto something, and I think it does complement Maz's point about hands-on education. I think it's very abstract, and I think if you give people the hands-on tools to kind of learn, that will help breed success. And I think from my view today, that's still missing. I've been approached by some folks to become more involved in the various RIRs and the operator groups around the globe. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is really a combination of both Jeff and Maz's point about hands-on, interoperability. The specs are the specs, but without things working together, like they're just words on paper.
Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely a thing we've been running into a lot over the last 20 years, and it's still not completely where it should be. So please, Anurag.
Thanks, Ender. So on your question about the future, I would say maybe we should. This is something I often say on the IPv6 workshops I would conduct. If you take a step back and look at the growth of technologies, it's fascinating. Look at the growth of bandwidth equipment on the core. Better DWDM, more cheaper fiber, lots of high dense fiber. If you look at the interconnection, more exchanges, more peering. If you look at the content delivery, more CDNs, more better latency, more lower latency, and so on. So it has been really fascinating growth. On the other side, which is the last mile, again similar picture. More fiber, more GPON-like technologies. What's the bottleneck here? It's the addressing. Addressing is still the bottleneck. Addressing is actually keeping these things behind in many aspects. If you see, many of the app developers are now just defaulting towards client server model rather than using peer-to-peer model, because they're quite certain that they'll not get peer-to-peer to work in complicated NAT environments. So it's extremely important for the future. That more and more V6 is deployed. I agree with the idea around making sure to turn on IPv6 by default. That probably would be a really good step. We do that at Hurricane Electric. We do turn on IPv6 by default at every step. And as far as I can think, other important contributors in the industry should be able to do the same, whether it's content players or exchanges or eyeball players. The amount of benefit you get by turning on V6 by default, of course, varies depending on who you are. It's a very chicken egg problem. So if you are an eyeball operator, there's a very high chance you'll get lots of traffic when you turn on IPv6. But if you're a content player and the V6 deployment is relatively low in your geography, then you're going to get much lower traffic on IPv6. So you might be worried whether it's worth it or not. For the future, it definitely is. And for future, it would be a good idea to change the policy to turn on V6 by default. The other part here is what can we do to promote V6? Well, there are various things where you can push V6 for, like make sure that the websites, DNS, and the content side is dual stacked. It does not harms you in majority of the cases. On the same way, you can ensure that the exchanges are dual stacked. You can ensure that the peerings are dual stacked. I was recently looking at the quality of peering in different geographies with respect to IPv4 and IPv6. And IPv6 still feels at times slightly suboptimal when you see at the scale of internet. And large reason for that is of course the lack of dual stacking of all the sessions. There are times when people would just dual stack 1 or 2 sessions against all their BGP sessions with various peers and transits and so on. So future, you are going to look at V6 by default. That should be the theme. Thanks.
Thank you. Jeff, you're next.
Yeah.
What do you to move IPv6 forward?
Well, I think 2012 was one of the last of the days of the youth of the internet. At the time, evangelist engineers were still able to convince their companies to do things. The business case at the time behind IPv6 was based largely on the individual enthusiasm of a few individuals. The market case really didn't exist. A lot's changed in those last 10 years and we've grown up. This is a business in a deregulated economy. Businesses make decisions based on cost and benefit, and properly so. There's no one to tell us what to do. What actually happens is each of us in our own sort of context of business makes choices as to what services we deliver and why. And because it's a deregulated business, ultimately what sort of makes this industry move forward are consumer choices. And so the real question is, what makes V6 a choice that consumers are happy to fund? And I think one of the most enlightening cases in recent years was in 2017 through 2019 with Reliance Jio. They were pushing forward in a massive market, an entirely new internet service that was, even by the standards of the Indian economy, incredibly affordable, massive scale and low cost. And it was totally obvious to the engineers at Reliance Jio that the only way they could do that was to actually do this with a huge V6 deployment and only use V4 when forced. In other words, get rid of as much of V4 out of their network as they possibly could. You can't get rid of it completely. Too many services are still on it. But where possible, convince both their service platforms and content platforms to run V6 and make their entire network by default V6. This wasn't a decision about enthusiasm. It wasn't, evangelicism. It wasn't promotion. It was business. And quite frankly, once V6 gets into that mold, that this is a simple business decision. It gets rid of some elements of cost that are otherwise untenable for the business. Once you get to that point, it's an easy decision. And so realistically in America and a lot of the other developed markets, this is kind of happening. The places where it's yet to be realized are those still developing markets. And Africa is a huge, massive red on anyone who actually does V6 measurement. And China's story is slow, very slow, considering the size of the market. And so in some ways, it's, I think, a case of patience. It's not a case of more promotion. It's actually a case of a developing business maturity, that the business of communications is what it's all about. And V6's role inside that is now being appreciated by, most parts of the industry. What do we need to do? Sit back and watch. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I see John has his hand up. John, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, briefly, one comment to Jeff's statement there. So Jeff, even back in 2005, it really went deeper than evangelicism and enthusiasm. At the time, for me, V6 was a tool to recover and replace V4 with V6 and recover publicly routable IPv4 addresses to the tune of several /8s at the time. Very, very strong commercial, easy 3-minute conversation with anybody with an E before their VP that they could digest. And that inevitably, at least from my seat, that laid the groundwork. So I agree with you. I think the only thing I don't agree with is, even back in 2005, those inklings were, they were there, right? It might not have been as obvious to people, but that's, that was basically the worm I used to go fishing at the time, right? And it seemed to work out okay.
Thank you. So what I started by saying, up to now that we got the feeling that IPv6 on by default was where we need to go. When I hear this, it goes even further, because it's not just IPv6 on by default, it's almost IPv4 off by default and IPv4 as a service. So yesterday I was talking to Shin, and there was, so we were talking about this. So I'm very curious. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to talk about the more technical things to do, IPv6 move forward. Then, in Japan, for example, we are going to introduce for example, smart meter for the household electric metrics nationwide from now on. Then Japanese, regulation body already, decided every smart meter must have V6, not V4, because the two cover the nationwide from now on. That's the only choice to do that. So like that, and as Jeff said, that business makes move forward. So that's really true. So we can find that's kind of a new application can come to the internet. But then at the same time, according to our experience, this 10 years, the transport port, level of the IPv6 is quite everywhere in Japan. As I said that, the IPv6 fiber to the home is already, by default own and cellular phone gives you. But the remaining things is, and I'd like to point out to two things. Then one is not just only V6 transport by default, by default, but also all the DNS authoritative server must have V6 transportation. That is really controversial maybe, but we have to do it. That's what we'd like to move forward. Another thing is, as we discussed yesterday, it's Mr. Ma coming from Google Cloud. So still we have a technical program to implement IPv6 into the Kubernetes virtual PC implementation. Namely, all the people using a ULA as just a private V6 address. So we have to fix it type of things. But then because this is time is very short, then I really would like to encourage you to come to Yokohama next March, because we Japanese community, hosts IETF event in Yokohama in March. Actually, not just only for the IETF, but next year, IETF, IGF, even this APNIC is coming to Japan, right? So many people will enjoy the Japanese cuisine and lots of things. Fortunately, now yens goes quite weak. So, everything is cheap. So please, come to Japan and then let's discuss every technical details in Yokohama, please. That's the things what I'd like to do.
I don't know, like you wanted to reply to this. Now it's a real panel, people interacting.
So I don't really have a reply here, but I was having a chat with my good friend and a known person in the community, Martin Levy. He used to be director for IPv6 strategy at Hurricane Electric a while ago. So I was having this chat. He was the one involved during the V6 launch, and he said, "What are your thoughts? How was the time like?" And he suggested me to put this quote. I'm quoting him now. So start of quote. A lot of folks spend far too much time and way too much energy in convincing their peers to do something which is highly important and obviously inevitable. Let's focus on future and not dwell on highly frustrating past. and he also asked me to add Martin Levy, happily retired.
So, please, yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to take my APRGF hat off for now, although it is very linked, but I'll put on my work hat, which is I work for Alliance for Affordable Internet. And we work with the low and middle income countries, particularly focusing on policies and regulatory frameworks. One of the challenges that we see is that there's a lot of policies that are very outdated. To broadband policies in particular. So that's the struggle when we're talking about migrating from IPv4 to IPv6, because how does that actually apply to the policies, and how can they update their policies so the policymakers understand how to actually apply that? The other is, I think Jeff mentioned this, that we need to focus on the low and middle income countries, particularly small businesses that are very much struggling. Migrating is costly. Affordability is an issue. And if you want to think about meaningful connectivity at the end of the road, you need to consider all this, not just, it's an infrastructure, of course, problem, but also various other issues when it comes to meaningful connectivity and access. And the other thing is the cost of equipment, but also the skills, right? A lot of these businesses, they don't have the right people to actually help them with the migration. So again, how do we create incentives, particularly for small businesses, for small countries, for small developing countries that are struggling with resources, etc., and to make sure that it's sustainable? And how do we make sure that they can migrate from IPv4 to 6? I'm all for it, but I would like to hear some interesting ideas and incentives for these countries. Thanks.
Of course.
Actually, the recently, Japanese community tried to do the V6 only operation, not the dual stack. Then V4 just can run top of it, V4 as a service. The reason why is reducing the operational cost. According to our experiences, dual stack costs a lot. Like logging or firewalling and everything. Rather than that, make network simple, only using the IP version 6. Then we can turn on the V4 just as a service. So that's actually one of the things that we can justify this movement, move forward. So that's one thing I can tell you about that. But at the same time, now the CP devices operation system is completely V6 ready. You all debugged, then competition reduced such kind of equipment cost. So, please try to do the simple network operation to reduce the cost, to not to migrate, to reduce the cost. That's my answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Kia ora. Ulrich Speidel from New Zealand. So we had an interesting little discussion over dinner last night. So the organization that I work for, which is New Zealand's biggest university, is the proud owner of a /16 and an additional /24. And it was pointed out to me that, look, every address in that pool currently, if you were able to get rid of it, is worth $100. And so it occurs to me that we're probably sitting on around, $6 million, US or $10 million New Zealand, which by the standards of my organization is actually a significant, chunk of its balance sheet. And I'm not even sure that it shows up in our balance sheet because it's obviously something that's, we've been sitting on that that's been appreciating over time that we probably haven't accounted for, unlike, for our buildings and stuff like this. And it just sort of occurs to me that if we needed to go and pay for that migration, then really those 6 million would probably pay for the people, for the, for the change in equipment, for everything. And I'm just not sure that our management really understands this or is even aware of it. So one of the things I'm going to take home is that I'll talk to them about it. But before I do that, the question that I really have is that if we are now going to be selling off our IPv4 addresses to, people who desperately want to have it like heroin, is this even ethical? I mean, we're getting rid of it, and we're using the proceeds to pay for our own, changeover, but literally palming those things off at what, at the end of the day will be a very inflated price to somebody who's going to be stuck with it and who needs it desperately. And I'm just not sure. What do people think?
I actually like to respond to that one myself, because for 11.5 years, I've been address policy co-chair in the RIPE region. And I was actually there when we introduced the transfer policy. So I was actually involved in this bit. And the questions you asked, like, is this ethical? You got these resources for free and now you're selling them. It was a very difficult thing at the time. But at the same time, now we realize there is a shortage. And if people who can miss them, either because they migrated to newer technology or maybe somebody still has V4 space that they're not using, putting it on the market, at least make sure that somebody else can benefit from it. And yes, you're making money from it, but in the current time of shortage, shortage usually does mean value. And if you can make your network better and do IPv6, while at the same time enabling somebody else who still really needs V4 to continue their business, it becomes less unethical. It's still a thing where, especially the old people from the community who remember the days when you could just ask and you would get all the address space you needed for free, feel a bit guilty about. But in the current situation, actually selling addresses to somebody who is waiting for them and dependent on them is not such a bad thing anymore. So it has shifted. 10 years ago, I would have given a very different answer.
So to add, if you want to know more about this, there is a gentleman there. His name is Lee. Talk to him and he will explain you everything.
So I see I saw that Jeff had his hand up. Jeff, do you want to respond now?
I'll be very brief, and it's a response to the previous speaker, questioner. Look, we used to think that IPv6 was a rich country club, that only the countries with the highest GDP per capita could afford to do V6. Everyone else was kind of slumming it on NATs and CGNs, etc. And then along came India, which is not a rich country, certainly not in GDP per capita standards. It's the second largest pool of IPv6 users on the planet. What's the largest? China. And again, that's not the richest country on the planet. And you've got to ask yourself, if those countries can afford this kind of rollout and are motivated to do so, then the real issue is not rich or poor. The real issue is not, I can't afford it. There are other inhibitory factors in those markets that are actually creating this situation. Now, in some cases, it is a reluctance on the content providers to enable V6 globally. They kind of look at it and go, why should I turn on V6 in a market that only uses V4? Fair enough, it's a reasonable observation. But while they keep on looking at each other and waiting for one person or another to jump, nothing happens. And that's what we're experiencing. But don't be fooled by rich versus poor. As I said, the largest V6 populations are not in the richest of the countries out there. It's not a rich versus poor thing. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. I just got informed that we're closing the microphone lines after the current 3 people who are there. So please.
Ituate, I'm an APNIC community trainer, and I work for managed service provider Taracom in New Zealand. It's good to see that there's a lot of eagerness in the community to adopt IPv6, but the way I look at it is that the real people that should be here are the providers out there. I know for a fact that in New Zealand, a lot of the ISPs haven't adopted it, right? They have their own reasons. Cost is the main factor towards it, because not only with that, they're turning on a new layers, but the support that comes with it. There's always issues when you implement anything new. My thought on this is that maybe, it's good that there was a need for us to turn off V4 and activate V6. Probably the best way to do this is that instead of using, the legacy private V4 address, the first thing that we should do is turn off that private V4 address and activate the V6 private V4 address and translate it as in V6 to V4, so that you can reach the internet via V4. That way we can at least start something rather than us discussing it on every meetings. Every meeting I go to, we need to adopt V6. Come on, member countries, you need, or APNIC members, you need to buy V6 address space. But every time we discuss this and we meet again on another APNIC meeting, it's the same conversation. So what changed? Nothing. So maybe the best way to do this is, it's good that there was a proposal to turn off V4. And I think that's the best way to do it. You turn off V4 private addresses, activate V6 private, and at least we start something. So that way we can test out the applications, works perfectly on V4. It's more like an experiment, a start of an experiment, so that we can at least have V6 on the private network while we get management to adopt it and say, yes, let's go V6 fully.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, sorry if I'm speaking for you, John, but I think you would sympathize with this very much. Stop talking, start doing.
Yep.
Who wants to go next?
I've got a question from Zoom chatter from Yingchu Shen from Taiwan. It was following on from Anju. She says that it's tough to promote it to consumers who don't know the benefits themselves. So she's asking the question, how do you explain to the general consumer about IPv6 and make them have demands to push the ISP to turn it on?
Okay, this is actually a very old discussion, and my response is usually, does the customer ever specifically ask for IPv4? You know, people just want internet. They want YouTube. They want Netflix. The customer doesn't care about the version of the protocol. That's the responsibility of the ISP. I think ISP should not make their customers responsible for knowing what to ask, because the customer is not the specialist, the ISP is. So is any, like I have a strong opinion on this. Is anybody who wants to?
Exactly. You know, according to our experience, even I am the author of the RFC 6888 defines the carrier grade net common requirement. But then I know that CGN is costs a lot. Then Japanese, community knows that, rather than to introduce CGN widely, move forward to the V6, then make network faster. Then customer can just enjoy the high speed in YouTube or something like that. We do not explain the protocol our customer is using. Just let them use. Then they just say that, yeah, makes faster. That's it. No protocol version is discussed with customer. So that's what we should do.
Tobias Wiewich and Max Planck Institute for Informatics. And let's hope I stand far away enough from Lee on the matter of the ethics of selling v4 space. So if I remember correctly, when I got my blocks, maybe v4, maybe v6, maybe my ASN, the RIPE NCC was relatively clear about them not giving something to me, but awarding me like at least the limited usage right for that. And what we have now, if we look at the ethics, the argument is, well, it's scarce, so people should have a mechanic to like trade, so people who need can get. But the thing is, we are looking at a world where the people who got the addresses are from a very specific, mostly privileged region, and the people who need are usually not. So at the moment, we are basically redistributing funds from, well, those who were privileged in the beginning, well, the other way around, towards those who were privileged in the beginning. And in the context of like this, you just get the right to use it. The question would be, wouldn't you attain the same goal of redistributing addresses if they would just hand it back to the rear?
That's a very strong argument. Anybody want to respond to this? Otherwise, I think we've already taken 15 minutes of break, so.
Wrong panel, Sander.
John.
Yeah, I think that's for a different panel at a different conference.
So thank you all for staying into the coffee break. I hope this was both interesting and useful to you. And as we had the World IPv6 Day and launch 10 years ago, where competitors actually work together to make the internet better, please keep in mind, we as a community can do this. So if there's anything where you say like, this is what we need to get IPv6 on by default and actually make IPv6 the standard, please talk to us. Please talk to any of our panelists, because I believe as a community, we can work together and do this.
Actually, I have a crazy idea. Listening to all this, if we, for example, if you make the June 6th of the next year, if we make an event called IPv6 World Day, IPv6 on by default or something like this, who in the room would be able to prepare up to that date and sign up for, yes, I'm going to do for my customers and everything I do IPv6 on by default? Come on, show of hands. Who would do it? Thank you very much.